In April 2024, I headed to China for a month to spend some time there as a resident artist in the ancient river town called Zhujiajiao in western Shanghai. It wasn't my first time in China, as 5 years ago or so, I spent a month teaching art in a private school in Beijing, and that trip left quite an impression. This time was quite different as well because I wasn't just teaching every day. Instead, I had time to walk around and explore the culture and the surroundings and hang out with the locals and really experience a unique and interesting culture in more of an insider way. I was also learning something new and overcoming some obstacles every day because some of you might know, trying to navigate China as a European person might be a little bit challenging. I also had a deep dive into Buddhism and Taoism, and I visited many sacred sites and temples during my stay. Some of those were ancient and some of them were modern and minimal, all of them really beautiful and fascinating in their own unique way. As usual, I've been collecting a lot of visual notes and observations, and I knew that I would like to explore this subject artistically later on. So in one of the local Tao temples, I've come across this amazing device called the Luopan Compass. It's very complex and it's a very old tool on finding direction, not just in space, but also in spiritual and physical life. And it's really fascinating. It's been around for thousands of years. I started thinking about building a mechanism that would become my own rendering of the compass. The plan was to build a simple rotating circular structure that would be this foundation for multiple watercolor collage bits and bobs. I would also place them further away from the circle so that the light falling onto these different parts of the collage would create some interesting light and shadow play and some sort of cool organic effects. The original Luopan Compass, it's a very complicated tool. I just used the very basic foundational bits to play off it, and to be honest, that was more than enough to keep me going, and I was pretty excited to start building this object. I started the process with a rough layout sketch, followed by exploring the main concepts like the 4 directions and the Feng Shui animals that are assigned to them. Turtle of the north, the phoenix of the south, the dragon of the east and the tiger of the west. And there are also 4 natural elements that accompany each animal. Turtle represents water, phoenix fire, dragon represents wood, and metal is assigned to tiger. Those 4 would become the key elements in the work, and the rest of the collage would consist of all kinds of shapes, forms, characters, and objects that would gradually be inspired by me being in China, exploring it and its various elements. Over the course of 2 weeks, I have designed and created around 50 elements that were then painted, cut out, and carefully arranged on this rotating plate. And the rotating plate, I've built it myself as well. I put together 2 round wooden parts that I've painted and prepared to be composed together through a rotating hardware plate that is often used in assembling a rotating Chinese dinner table. I placed the central piece in the middle, and after that the 4 key elements, each on its side away from the center. And after that, I was just using my intuition, sort of my feel for composition, to arrange all of the additional elements. And I have to say as well that creating and designing those elements, that was also mostly intuitive. So I didn't have a list of the things that I wanted to create. Just trying to go into the zone, remembering what influenced or affected or inspired me the most. And every day I would just go for walks. I would look around, I would talk to people, try different foods, and I would go into unusual spaces like these museums and temples and parks. Just getting lost in those ancient streets of this river town, watching people and watching the life itself. And all of that time I spent observing has inspired a lot of these painted elements that I then created and put them out there, arranged them on this circular board on my future surreal compass. The original idea was to have the front or middle parts to be mobile, to be rotating. The elements on the front layer could then change position depending on the rotation of the wheel and thus create a different pattern combined with the background. But unfortunately, sometimes our ideas they don't happen exactly the way we see them. I was telling myself that it's okay. You know, I still very much enjoyed working with the idea, and at the end I had this quite unique object, and I really enjoyed just sort of watching it myself because I didn't really know how it would look at the end. It was mainly an intuitive collage, and I didn't have the final design in front of me. So as it was coming together, I was observing the process myself. I was the audience of creating that piece. I remember that I felt exactly like that's it, it's finished, it's ready. And after that I was just enjoying playing with the lights, watching the different elements cast the shadows differently every time. Another thing to mention is that not for the first time already, I've been really enjoying the practice of collecting field recordings. And this time I put together the soundtrack for the exhibition. It was playing in the background all along. And it was just a loop of intertwined sound recordings that I've made in Shanghai and surrounding areas, in other cities, in temples, on the streets, in the museum, and in all kinds of interesting places. Those were very different sounds, but when I started putting them together, it just made a lot of sense, and jigsaw was falling into place, and it really sort of became the perfect soundtrack for this piece itself. At the very last moment, I did a little experiment. The sounds I've collected, my field recordings, I mapped them to these weird clay shapes that I've made basically 2 days before the exhibition. And then through using Playtronica, people could interact with this clay objects and make them recreate those different sounds when you touch them. Yeah, that looked quite fun and weird, and I hope to explore this concept a bit more in the future. I hope to come back to China a few more times and hopefully explore more of its nature, because it really has this amazing scale or range of things, and hopefully even more artworks will be inspired by similar trips in the future.